August 1944. The South Pacific. The humidity on the island of Peleliu sits at 100%. The temperature inside the Japanese defensive tunnels exceeds 115 degrees Fahrenheit. For the soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army, the war has become a slow, agonizing slide into starvation. Supply lines have been severed by American submarines. A soldier's daily ration has been reduced to a handful of rice, supplemented by roots, lizards, and sometimes, when desperation sets in, boiled leather belts. Japanese officers keep morale alive with a single narrative. The enemy is suffering too. They tell their men that the Americans are far from home, that their supply lines are overextended, that the decadent West is weak and breaking under the strain of a total war. But just a few miles offshore, the United States Navy is conducting an operation that would shatter that narrative instantly. A massive vessel is being towed into position among the fleet. It is ugly, slow, and unarmed. It is built not of steel but of concrete. But its cargo is more devastating to Japanese morale than a 1,000-pound bomb. This ship is a floating factory. Its engines are not designed for propulsion, but for refrigeration. Its crew are not gunners, but machinists and chemists. Its designation is BRL, Barge, Refrigerated, Large. Its mission is to produce 500 gallons of fresh chocolate and vanilla ice cream every single shift. While Japan fights for survival, America is spending millions of dollars to ensure its sailors can have dessert in the middle of the ocean. This is the story of the ultimate logistical flex in military history. The Dry Navy. To understand why the U.S. Navy built a floating ice cream factory, we must go back to 1914. Before World War I, alcohol was a standard part of naval life. But in 1914, General Order 99 banned alcohol on all U.S. Navy ships. The daily rum ration was gone. To replace the vice of alcohol, the Navy turned to sugar. By the time Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, ice cream had become more than just a treat. It was the currency of the fleet. The G-Dunk stand, naval slang for the soda fountain, became the center of social life on every major warship. When the war started, supply officers initially tried to cut ice cream from the manifest to save space for torpedoes and fuel. The backlash was immediate. The Medical Corps reported a drop in morale. Recruitment officers warned that taking away the G-Dunk would hurt enlistment. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal, a former investment banker who understood the value of assets, intervened personally. In 1942, he issued a directive that prioritized ice cream ingredients alongside ammunition and fuel. He declared, "Ice cream, in my opinion, is among the most neglected morale factors." Forrestal understood something the Japanese High Command did not. In a war of attrition, the mental state of the soldier is a logistical variable. And the United States was about to industrialize happiness. The legend of the Lexington. The obsession reached legendary status during the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942. The massive aircraft carrier USS Lexington was struck by 2 Japanese torpedoes and 2 bombs. Fires raged out of control. The order was given to abandon ship. As the crew prepared to jump into the burning, shark-infested waters, they did something inexplicable. Survivors reported seeing sailors breaking the locks on the ship's freezers. Before abandoning the carrier, hundreds of men lined up, not for lifeboats, but to gorge themselves on the ship's massive supply of ice cream. They filled their helmets with vanilla and strawberry. They ate until their brains froze, reasoning that it was better to eat it than let it sink to the bottom of the ocean. One survivor recalled floating in the water, watching his ship burn, with the taste of sweetness still in his mouth. When the Navy High Command heard this story, they realized that ice cream wasn't just food. It was a connection to home. It was a reminder of what they were fighting for. The $1 Million Barge. By 1944, the war had moved vast distances across the Pacific. Small ships, destroyers, destroyer escorts, and PT boats did not have the electrical capacity to run freezers. The sailors on these small vessels were fighting the hardest battles, yet they were denied the one treat that made life bearable. The Navy's solution was an engineering marvel that defied economic logic. They commissioned the BRL vessels. Because steel was critically needed for tanks and aircraft carriers, The hulls of these barges were cast from reinforced concrete. Each barge cost $1 million in 1945. Adjusted for inflation, that is nearly $17 million today. $17 million for a ship that couldn't fire a shot. The technical specifications of the BRL were staggering for a non-combat vessel. Length: 265 feet. Displacement: over 2,000 tons. Inside the concrete hull was a labyrinth of insulation and machinery. A massive flash freezing plant was powered by diesel generators. The barge carried 1,500 tons of frozen meat and 500 tons of fresh vegetables, acting as a floating supermarket. But the centerpiece was the ice cream plant. The main churn could produce 10 gallons of ice cream every 7 minutes. It ran virtually 24 hours a day, producing 500 gallons per shift. The barge also housed storage for thousands of gallons of milk powder and sugar. It had no engines for propulsion. It had to be towed across thousands of miles of ocean by fleet tugs, consuming fuel and resources, just to park next to a task force and dispense treats. The economics of the Pacific. The arrival of an ice cream barge in a sector changed the economy of the fleet. The barge became a mother ship for the smaller vessels. Destroyers would maneuver alongside, braving rough seas, just to transfer canisters of the frozen gold. A complex barter system emerged. Ice cream became the most valuable currency in the Pacific theater. A quart of ice cream could buy a Japanese officer's sword. 5 gallons could buy a bottle of whiskey smuggled from a supply ship. But the most famous trade involved human lives. Standard operating procedure stated that if a pilot was shot down and rescued by a destroyer, the destroyer captain would return the pilot to his aircraft carrier. But the destroyer captains realized they held leverage. They began demanding a ransom. To get their pilot back, the aircraft carrier had to pay the destroyer in ice cream. The going rate was 20 gallons of ice cream for one pilot. If the pilot was an ace or the flight leader, the price went up to 25 gallons. It became a formalized ritual. The destroyer would pull up to the carrier, a bosun's chair would transfer the pilot, and the carrier would send back large metal canisters of vanilla. Even amidst the carnage of war, the Americans had established a capitalist market based on dessert. Aerial creameries. The demand was so high that units far from the barges began improvising. This led to one of the most bizarre technical innovations of the war, pioneered by Marine Corps Fighter Squadron VMF-122. The squadron flew the Vought F-4U Corsair, a fighter with a massive 2,000 horsepower engine and a service ceiling of over 35,000 feet. Squadron Commander J. Hunter Reinbug realized that at 30,000 feet, the air temperature was roughly minus 40 degrees. He also knew that the vibration of the engine was intense. The mechanics rigged 5-gallon ammunition cans into the access panels of the Corsair's wings. They mixed canned milk and cocoa powder, then sent a pilot on a test flight. The pilot would climb to 33,000 feet, loiter for 30 minutes, and return. The vibration acted as the churn. The altitude acted as the freezer. The first attempts were failures. The mixture froze solid into a block of ice. But American engineering is relentless. The mechanics added small propellers to the cans, driven by the wind slipstream, to stir the mixture in flight. It worked. American pilots were effectively flying $100,000 fighter planes on dedicated sorties to make chocolate ice cream. Consider the fuel cost. Consider the wear on the engines. In any other military, this would be a court-martial offense for wasting resources. In the U.S. military, it was celebrated as Yankee ingenuity. The Japanese reality. To fully appreciate the impact of this, we must look at the other side of the hill. While Americans were churning ice cream at 30,000 feet, the Japanese supply chain had completely collapsed. On Guadalcanal, which the Japanese called Starvation Island, soldiers were dying at a rate of hundreds per week from malnutrition. Diaries recovered from Japanese bodies tell a horrific story. One diary entry from 1943 reads, "No rice left. We are eating weeds. The Americans fire artillery all night. They have endless ammunition. We have 2 bullets left." Japanese submarines, designed for combat, were being used as underwater supply trucks, trying to smuggle bags of rice to starving garrisons. Most were sunk. When Japanese intelligence officers interrogated American prisoners, they often asked about food. They refused to believe the answers. When a captured American pilot mentioned the ice cream barges, the Japanese interrogators thought he was lying. They thought it was propaganda. The concept was too alien. How could a nation fighting a global war spare the shipping tonnage for sugar and milk? Japan was scraping metal from temple bells to build aircraft. America was building concrete ships to freeze milk. The psychological victory. The turning point for many Japanese officers came when they visually confirmed the abundance. There is a famous account of a Japanese colonel on a bypassed island observing the American fleet through binoculars. He watched a supply transfer. He saw crates of fresh oranges, meat, and canisters of ice cream being moved from ship to ship. He turned to his staff and said, "We cannot win. They are not fighting a war. They are conducting a business transaction." This realization, that the enemy possessed infinite resources, was more demoralizing than any defeat on the battlefield. The Japanese doctrine of Yamato Damashii taught that spirit could overcome steel. But the ice cream barge proved that spirit cannot overcome an industrial supply chain that operates without limits. Conclusion. By the end of the war in 1945, the U.S. Navy was producing and consuming over 65 million gallons of ice cream annually. The BRL barges were the ultimate symbol of American industrial might. They proved that the United States could project not just power, but luxury, across the largest ocean on Earth. The war was not won by the atomic bomb alone. It was won by the truck, the Liberty ship, and the concrete barge. It was won by a logistics system that treated starvation as an unacceptable failure, and ice cream as a mandatory necessity. When the Japanese generals surrendered on the deck of the USS Missouri, they were surrendering to a nation that could deliver a scoop of vanilla to a teenager in a foxhole 6,000 miles from home. History remembers the tanks and the planes, but the sailors remember the barge. The $1 million ship that proved that while amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics, and Americans talk ice cream.